stimulus spending and temporary tax rebates, they didn't work when President Bush tried them. They didn't work when President Obama tried them. And they're a very poor substitute for pro-growth economic policies. And that's the problem here, is these are crowding out what we could otherwise do to bring more certainty to job creators. This does not do that. And what just drives me crazy is we couldn't get the Democrats in the Senate and the White House to support cutting $100 billion over 10 years to make sure that this did not hurt the deficit. Look, $100 billion over 10 years of spending cuts they couldn't come up with. The president just gave us a $47 trillion budget, and he wouldn't agree to spend $46.9 trillion to help pay for this. And so we supported extending this holiday, paying for all these things with spending cuts. I voted for that. But now we're talking about not paying for these things, and I don't think this works. It's just not good economic growth policy, and we've already sort of proven that these temporary sugar high economics, these stimulus effects just don't work to grow the economy, and they're a very poor substitute for lowering tax rates, for having predictable regulations, for getting rid of crony capitalism, for addressing the real drivers of our debt, which would do so much more to grow our economy than doing these sorts of things.
Congressman Van Hollen, I spoke with business leaders this week at a panel here in Washington. You can't argue that this is somehow a big profile and courage to extend a tax cut that's not paid for at a time of great fiscal imbalance in Washington.
Well, first, David, I do support the extension of the payroll tax cut. We, the Democrats, did want it to be offset. We proposed that we offset it by closing a lot of corporate tax loopholes, that we offset it by asking folks at the very high end of the income scale to pitch in more. We did not think it made sense at all to be providing 160 million working Americans with a payroll tax cut to help them, and at the same time cut things like the Medicare support and increase their premiums to help offset it. That didn't make any sense
at all.
So you
voted against, and that's why you voted against it.
No, I voted against it because of one of the pay-fors disproportionately impacted a lot of federal employees. But I signed the conference committee report. Your question was, did you support the payroll tax cut? And I do, very, very strongly, because Paul is not right on this. It will help economic growth. It could add up to 1% to GDP this year. It's common sense. You're putting more money in the pockets of the American people. Then they can go out and spend that money buying goods and services. That means businesses, small businesses, can sell more goods and services. They can hire more people. Just as the Congressional Budget Office determined that the Recovery Act, at its peak in 2010, saved or created up to 3.3 million jobs in the economy, and just as the auto rescue help save the auto industry and save about 1 million jobs, the payroll tax cut is an important step.
All right, so
it's not the be-all and end-all, but it's an important step.
So, Chairman Ryan, let me ask a larger philosophical question right now. Vision of government. We got a budget here that's probably not going to be passed because they haven't passed one in over 1,000 days. We're in a campaign year, so budgets seem not to really matter. What you have are campaign blueprints, and you have a Republican vision of what government ought to do for Americans and a Democratic vision of what they ought to do. I had the Chief of Staff, Jack Lew, here, former budget chairman, former head of OMB for the president, and I asked him about what was necessary now, and I want you to respond to what he said.
I think that there's pretty broad agreement that the time for austerity is not today. We need to be on a path where over the next several years we bring our deficit under control. Right now we have a recovery that's taking root, and if we were to put in austerity measures right now, it would take the economy in the wrong way.
So this is a fundamental point, Congressman Ryan. Do you disagree with that? Because Ben Bernanke, the Fed chief, has made this point, which is protect the recovery. Don't get into the realm of austerity where we're belt tightening to the point, you know, that you see what's happening in Greece, that you could hurt recovery that's occurring here in the country.
Well, first of all, the White House's rhetoric just doesn't match the substance. What Chairman Bernanke said to us in the Budget Committee is, if you put in place a long-term plan to fix our debt crisis, that will help the economy today. The issue, David, is that the White House isn't even trying to solve this problem. When you strip away all the budget gimmicks and the accounting tricks, they just gave us a budget that has a net spending increase of $1.5 trillion and a tax increase of $1.9 trillion. It's not leadership. If you just did nothing, the debt is set to go up 78%. If you pass the president's budget, it goes up 76%. So what they're doing is they're not leading. They're ducking responsibility, and that threatens our economy, and that will make us more like Greece. Here's the issue. If we keep kicking the can down the road and we don't face up to these great fiscal challenges we have a debt-fueled economic crisis ahead of us. And if we don't address them now, then it gets ugly like Greece, and then you have to impose the kind of austerity that they're imposing in Greece. We're saying let's fix this now while we can do it on our own terms. Let's put in place a plan to get this debt under control, to reduce our tax rates, broaden the base, and you can actually get more revenues into the government that way. And so we're actually giving the country a very clear and specific plan to get us off this path of debt onto a path of prosperity. And what we think we will achieve by actually offering credible solutions versus the White House, who isn't, is that we'll give the country a choice of two futures. We feel we owe the nation an opportunity to choose which path they want for America, and we're going to be specific. What is frustrating about the White House is they've had 4 budget submissions, and they've decided to duck this challenge every time. More debt, more spending, more taxes. That hurts our economy. That will lead to austerity, and we think that's wrong, and that's why we've put out alternatives. And all we seem to get from the president, look, we had Tim Geithner, who came to the committee on Thursday, who said, quote, "We don't have a definitive solution. We just don't like yours." I can't think of a more perfect example of what sums up this administration's utter lack of leadership. We have a debt crisis staring us in the face, and they're ignoring it, and that will lead to Greek-like austerity.